In the early months of 1943, the Pacific Ocean was a vast, unforgiving theater of total war. The Imperial Japanese Navy, though reeling from its catastrophic defeat at Midway and the brutal attrition of Guadalcanal, remained a formidable and lethal adversary. At the absolute center of Japan's war machinery stood one man whose strategic mind had reshaped naval warfare forever: Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. As the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, Yamamoto was not merely a brilliant tactician. He was an idolized figure within the Empire of Japan and the mastermind behind the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. To the Allied High Command, Yamamoto was the single most dangerous mind in the Axis sphere, a military strategist whose death could unravel the entire psychological foundation of the Japanese military effort. The story of his downfall began not in the skies above the Solomon Islands, but in the quiet, smoke-filled rooms of Allied naval intelligence. United States Navy cryptanalysts working tirelessly under the code-breaking initiative known as MAGIC had spent months piercing the operational security of the Japanese Navy's primary cipher system, JN-25. In mid-April 1943, cryptographers at Station HYPO in Hawaii intercepted a crucial, top-secret diplomatic dispatch sent from the headquarters of the 8th Fleet at Rabaul. The message was encoded with maximum security, detailing an itinerary that was astonishingly precise. It outlined an upcoming inspection tour by Admiral Yamamoto, aimed at boosting the sagging morale of forward garrisons in the northern Solomon Islands. The intercepted message provided exact dates, precise arrival times, flight paths, and even the specific composition of the aircraft carrying the admiral and his senior staff. On the morning of April 18, 1943, Yamamoto was scheduled to fly from Rabaul to Belleisle Airfield near Bougainville. His flight would consist of 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty twin-engine bombers escorted by 6 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters from the 204th Kakutai. For the American codebreakers, the precision of the itinerary was breathtaking. Yamamoto was known for his relentless punctuality, meaning that if the American forces could position interceptors at the exact right spot over Bougainville at 9:35 local time, they would catch the most valuable military target in the Pacific, completely off guard. When the intelligence reached Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of Pacific Ocean areas, the strategic implications were immense. Eliminating Yamamoto could inflict a devastating psychological blow on Japanese military morale while depriving their fleet of its finest commander. However, the decision carried extreme risk. If the Americans intercepted Yamamoto with obvious prior knowledge, the Japanese would inevitably realize that their sacred JN-25 cipher had been broken, forcing them to overhaul their military communications and blinding Allied intelligence at a critical junction of the war. Nimitz consulted with key advisors and sought authorization from the highest levels of government. President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself reportedly authorized the operation with a simple directive: get Yamamoto, to conceal the breach of intelligence. The Americans concocted a plausible cover story, disseminating false reports that coast watchers in the Solomon Islands had visually spotted a high-ranking Japanese commander boarding a transport plane. Executing the intercept was an extraordinary engineering and tactical nightmare. Yamamoto's destination was deep inside enemy-controlled territory. Over 400 miles away from the nearest Allied airbase at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. No standard Allied fighter possessed the operational range to fly to Bougainville, engage in combat, and return safely. The only aircraft in the entire South Pacific inventory capable of surviving such a distance was the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine, twin-boom heavy fighter equipped with long-range droppable fuel tanks. The P-38 possessed both the speed and the deadly firepower of 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm autocannon concentrated in its nose. The task of planning the mission fell to Major John W. Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron. The flight profile Mitchell devised was nothing short of suicidal precision. To avoid detection by Japanese radar posts and visual observers stationed along the island chain, the strike group could not fly a direct route. Instead, they would have to execute a massive westward detour across the open ocean, flying mere feet above the wavetops to stay under radar coverage. This meant navigating a total distance of over 600 miles purely by dead reckoning, using nothing more than a magnetic compass, an airspeed indicator, and a wristwatch, all while maintaining total radio silence. The margin for error was non-existent. A navigation error of just 2 degrees or a time calculation off by 3 minutes would result in the P-38s arriving at an empty sky, running out of fuel over enemy waters, and dying in the vast expanse of the Pacific. Mitchell assembled a strike force of 18 specially fitted P-38 Lightnings. The flight was divided into 2 distinct groups: a 4-plane killer flight designated to dive in and destroy the transport bombers, and a 14-plane cover flight tasked with climbing too high altitude to engage the inevitable swarms of escorting Zeros and protect the attack element. The designated primary shooters in the killer flight included Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr., Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine. At 7:10 on the clear morning of April 18th, the engines of 18 P-38 Lightnings roared to life at Henderson Field. Dust swept across the dirt runway as the heavy fighters lifted off into the bright tropical sky. Almost immediately, mechanical issues struck the strike force, a grim reminder of the operational fragility of wartime aviation. 2 P-38s suffered equipment failures and were forced to abort the mission and turn back. The remaining 16 fighters dropped down low, flying in tight formation just 30 feet above the shimmering blue waters of the Solomon Sea. For over 2 agonizing hours, the pilots flew in absolute silence, skimming the ocean, their engines humming continuously as they tracked the steady ticking of their clocks toward destiny. As the flight neared the island of Bougainville, the tension inside the narrow cockpits of the P-38 Lightnings reached a breaking point. Flying at dangerously low altitudes for hundreds of miles had exhausted the pilots both physically and mentally. Yet the crucial moment of the operation was just seconds away. At 9:30 for local time, Major John W. Mitchell looked toward the jungle-covered coast of Bougainville and adjusted his heading. His navigation had been flawlessly precise, right on schedule, sweeping down from the clouds at 4,500 feet. Were 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers surrounded by a defensive screen of 6-0 fighters. Yamamoto was exactly where the codebreakers had promised he would be. Major Mitchell signaled the attack via hand gestures, maintaining strict radio silence until the very last second. The 4 P-38s of the killer flight pushed their throttles forward, shedding their bulky external drop tanks with a loud, metallic clunk. The sudden drag reduction allowed the twin-engine fighters to surge forward, climbing rapidly toward the unsuspecting Japanese formation. It was a textbook ambush. The Japanese pilots, expecting a routine transport flight over controlled territory, were caught completely unawares. Yamamoto's bomber was flying low, preparing for its final descent toward Ball Ale Airfield, when the deadly shadows of the long-range American fighters swept up from the horizon, realizing the danger. The escorting Zeros dropped their own external tanks and dived violently to intercept the incoming threat. But it was already too late. Captain Thomas Landfear and Lieutenant Rex Barber banked sharply into the path of the enemy bombers. As the Zeros swooped in to defend the flagship, Landfear turned hard to meet the attacking fighters, drawing their fire and splitting the defensive formation. This maneuver cleared a direct vector for Rex Barber, who locked his sights onto the lead Betty bomber carrying Admiral Yamamoto. Barber closed in fast, his nose-mounted 20mm cannon and .50 caliber heavy machine guns roaring in a concentrated stream of armor-piercing lead and high-explosive incendiary rounds. Barber's burst ripped through the left engine and fuselage of Yamamoto's bomber. Thick black smoke instantly poured from the transport as metal paneling peeled away under the sheer kinetic force of the American fire. The bomber violently shuddered, lost control, and banked steeply to the left, plummeting down into the dense, suffocating jungle canopy of Bougainville. Seconds later, a massive cloud of orange flame and dark smoke burst through the green trees, marking the violent end of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Simultaneously, the second Betty bomber, carrying Yamamoto's chief of staff, Vice Admiral Matome Ogaki, was attacked by the remaining P-38s. Ogaki's pilot fought desperately to escape, but the bomber was critically damaged, plummeting down into the coastal waters offshore, where it hit the sea at high speed. Surprisingly, Vice Admiral Ogaki survived the water impact, pulled from the wreckage by local Japanese naval patrols. But the commander he served was gone forever. In the chaotic airspace above the jungle, a brief and fierce dogfight erupted. Lieutenant Raymond Hina's P-38 was hit during the engagement and was last seen trailing smoke over the ocean. He was never found, becoming the sole American loss of the mission. With their fuel reserves depleted to critically dangerous levels, Major Mitchell ordered the remaining P-38s to disengage immediately. Breaking off from the remaining Zeros, the Lightnings stayed low to the water, skimming the waves once more as they pushed their engines to maximum continuous power for the long, nerve-wracking flight back to Guadalcanal. When the surviving P-38s finally touched down at Henderson Field, their fuel gauges were hovering on absolute empty. The atmosphere on the airfield exploded into adrenaline-fueled relief and triumph, though high-ranking officers quickly clamped down on public celebrations to safeguard the secret of the broken cipher. A day later, a Japanese search and rescue team hacked its way through the dense, malaria-infested jungle of Bougainville to reach the scorched wreckage of the lead bomber. They found the crash site littered with debris. Sitting upright in the intact pilot's seat, pulled clear from the burning fuselage, was the body of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He was dressed in his pristine white dress uniform, his white-gloved hand still gripping the hilt of his traditional samurai katana. He had been struck by 2 heavy .50 caliber bullets during the air attack, dying instantly in the sky before the aircraft ever struck the trees. The Japanese Imperial High Command was utterly devastated by the loss. In accordance with military secrecy and public morale, the news of Yamamoto's death was suppressed from the Japanese public for over a month. When it was finally announced on May 21, 1943, the nation fell into a state of profound collective shock and grief. Yamamoto was awarded a state funeral, his ashes interred with full military honors, but no posthumous tribute could repair the colossal void left in the Japanese Naval Command structure. The strategic, brilliant mind that had unified and guided the combined fleet was gone, replaced by far less capable leaders who were increasingly overwhelmed by the industrial might and tactical evolution of the United States military. Operation Vengeance stands in the annals of military history as one of the most remarkable and complex targeted decapitation strikes ever executed in modern air warfare. It was a masterclass in intelligence, integration, navigation, and extreme tactical discipline. By combining the quiet brilliance of codebreakers thousands of miles away with the courage and mechanical mastery of fighter pilots flying over uncharted waters, the United States executed a precision strike that fundamentally shifted the psychological balance of the Pacific War. The elimination of Admiral Yamamoto did not just rob Japan of its top commander. It signaled to the entire world that the strategic initiative in the Pacific had irreversibly shifted to the Allies.